The underground slave markets of Florence in 1547 were a testament to humanity's capacity for cruelty, but for vampires, they represented something far worse: entertainment. Duchess Serafina Valdris descended the narrow stone steps leading to the auction chambers, her emerald silk gown rustling against the damp walls. The scent of fear, desperation, and unwashed bodies assaulted her enhanced senses, making her stomach turn with revulsion. She had been coming to these wretched places for over a decade now, ever since she had inherited her title and the vast wealth that came with it at the tender age of 25. Other vampire nobles attended for sport, to acquire new playthings for their twisted games or to demonstrate their power over lesser beings. Serafina came for an entirely different reason, one that had earned her a reputation as either a saint or a fool, depending on who was asked. The main auction chamber was carved from ancient Roman stone, its walls bearing the weight of centuries and the stains of countless atrocities. Torches flickered in iron sconces, casting dancing shadows that seemed to writhe with malevolent life. The vampire elite of Florence had gathered in their finest attire: velvet doublets adorned with precious gems, silk gowns that cost more than most humans earned in a lifetime, jeweled masks that couldn't quite hide the predatory gleam in their eyes. "Duchess Valdris," came a silky voice from behind her. She turned to see Count Marcello Ravenna approaching, his pale face split by a knowing smile that revealed the tips of his fangs. "How delightful to see you at another auction. Tell me, how many strays have you collected this month?" "Not nearly enough," Serafina replied coolly, her golden eyes meeting his without flinching. The Count was one of the more vocal critics of her hobby, purchasing slaves only to immediately grant them freedom. His own estate was notorious for the screams that echoed from its dungeons. "Such a waste of good coin," he continued, circling her like a predator sizing up potential prey. "These humans are meant to serve, to suffer for our amusement. Your misguided compassion only encourages their defiance against the natural order." "Perhaps," she said, turning her attention to the platform where the first lot was being displayed. A young woman barely out of childhood, her eyes hollow with despair. "Or perhaps it reminds them that not all of our kind have forgotten what honor means." Count Ravenna's laugh was like breaking glass mixed with the sound of distant screaming. "Honor? My dear Duchess, we are vampires. We are beyond such mortal concepts. We are gods among insects." Before Serafina could respond, the auctioneer's voice boomed through the chamber, cutting through the murmur of conversations. "Lords and ladies, welcome to tonight's selection. We have acquired some particularly interesting specimens for your consideration." The auction began with the usual parade of misery that had become sickeningly familiar to Serafina. Young women torn from their families, their beauty already beginning to fade under the weight of captivity. Strong men broken by months of torture and degradation, their spirits crushed but their bodies still useful for labor. Children whose eyes held no hope, only the blank stare of those who had seen too much evil too young. Serafina bid on several, her offers consistently outstripping the competition with amounts that made even the wealthy nobles gasp. Each time, whispers followed her bids, some mocking her soft heart, others curious about her true motives, a few expressing grudging admiration for her consistency. "Lot 15, the auctioneer called, dragging forward a girl who couldn't have been more than 16. Virgin, untouched, perfect for breaking in. 200 florins, Serafina called immediately, her voice cutting through the lewd comments from the crowd. 300, countered Lord Cassius, a vampire whose reputation for creative cruelty was legendary even among their kind. 1,000, Serafina said flatly, and the chamber fell silent. It was an astronomical sum for a single slave. Lord Cassius glared at her but didn't counter. The girl was led away to join Serafina's other purchases, tears of relief streaming down her face. It was nearly midnight when Lot 47 was announced, and by then, Serafina had spent enough gold to buy a small palace. But she couldn't stop. Each face that looked up at her from the auction block was someone's child, someone's hope, someone's future. Male, approximately 30 years of age. The auctioneer called out as guards dragged a figure onto the platform. Strong build despite recent conditioning. Fair warning, this one has proven difficult to manage. Serafina's breath caught in her throat. The man they forced onto the auction block was unlike any slave she had ever seen. His body was covered in scars that formed intricate, almost ritualistic patterns across his chest, arms, and back. But these weren't ordinary scars. They seemed to shimmer with a faint silver light that only her vampire vision could detect, and they formed symbols that tugged at some deep memory she couldn't quite place. His dark hair hung in matted waves past his shoulders, obscuring most of his face. Iron shackles bound his wrists and ankles, but despite the obvious signs of prolonged captivity and torture, he stood with a dignity that hadn't been broken. There was something about his stillness, the way he held himself despite the chains, that spoke of nobility, or perhaps royalty. "He refuses to speak," the auctioneer continued with obvious frustration, prodding the man with a silver-tipped rod that left smoking burns on his skin. "Won't even lift his head to acknowledge potential buyers. But he's strong. Survived 3 months of our most persuasive techniques without breaking. Perfect for those who enjoy a challenge." Serafina studied the man more closely, her enhanced senses picking up details that the human auctioneer missed. The scars on his body weren't random torture marks. They were symbols, runes that seemed familiar yet ancient beyond her knowledge. And there was something else. Something that made her enhanced senses tingle with recognition she couldn't explain. The way he breathed was wrong for a human. Too controlled, too measured. His skin, beneath the grime and blood, had a pallor that spoke of something other than mere illness. And when a torch flared nearby, she caught a glimpse of his profile that made her heart skip a beat. The bidding began at 50 gold florins. Lord Cassius, still smarting from his earlier defeat, opened with an eager bid. Others joined in, their voices growing more excited as they discussed the various tortures they might employ on such a defiant specimen. 100 florins, called Lady Beatrice, her painted lips curved in a cruel smile. "I have some new techniques I'd like to try on something so resilient." 150, countered Lord Cassius. "This one would look magnificent chained in my dungeon. I could make him last for years." 200, came another bid from the crowd, followed by appreciative murmurs about the entertainment value of breaking such a strong will. Serafina watched the man on the platform carefully. As each bid was called out, she noticed the slightest tension in his shoulders, a barely perceptible tightening of his jaw. He was listening, understanding every word, despite his apparent catatonia. More than that, she could sense something building in him, a coiled energy that reminded her of a predator preparing to strike. 250 florins, came another bid from the crowd. That's when it happened. At the sound of a particular voice, one she recognized as belonging to Lord Malpheus, a vampire notorious for his sadistic games involving silver and fire, the slave's head moved almost imperceptibly. It was the smallest of reactions, but Serafina's sharp eyes caught it. More importantly, she caught a glimpse of his profile. The strong jaw, the aristocratic nose, the way he carried himself despite his circumstances. This was no ordinary human. Every instinct she possessed screamed that there was far more to this man than met the eye. 300 florins, Lord Malpheus called out, his voice dripping with anticipation. "I have such plans for this one." The crowd murmured appreciatively. It was already well above the usual price for a slave, no matter how defiant or entertaining they might prove to be. Serafina made her decision, driven by an impulse she couldn't fully explain. 500 florins, she called out, her voice cutting through the chamber like a blade. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Every head in the chamber turned to stare at her, with expressions ranging from shock to outrage. Even the auctioneer seemed momentarily stunned by the astronomical bid. "Duchess Valdris?" Lord Cassius sputtered, his face flushing with anger. "Surely you don't intend to waste such a sum on another of your charitable projects?" "My coin, my choice," she replied evenly, though her heart was racing with an excitement she couldn't explain. Something about this particular slave called to her in a way that defied rational thought. "But 500 florins?" Lady Beatrice protested. "That's enough to buy an entire household of slaves. What could you possibly want with this broken thing?" "Perhaps I enjoy a challenge as much as the rest of you," Serafina said, her voice carrying a hint of steel that made several nobles step back. "Going once," the auctioneer called, his voice echoing in the suddenly silent chamber. "Twice." For just a moment, Serafina could have sworn she saw the slave's shoulders relax slightly. as if some terrible tension had been released. And was that the faintest hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth? Sold to Duchess Valdres. The gavel fell with a sound like thunder, and Serafina felt something shift in the world around her, as if fate itself had just taken a new direction. As the guards moved to transfer ownership, preparing to deliver her purchase to her estate, Serafina caught another glimpse of the slave's wrists beneath his shackles. What she saw made her blood run cold, and her heart race simultaneously. Carved into his skin, barely visible beneath the iron bonds, were symbols she recognized from the oldest vampire texts in her library, binding runes of a complexity and power that hadn't been seen for centuries. These weren't marks made by human captors torturing a defiant slave. These were vampire magic, designed to bind one of their own kind. An hour later, Serafina stood in the moonlit courtyard of her estate, waiting for her newest acquisition to be delivered. The Villa Valdres had been in her family for 3 centuries, its Renaissance architecture and carefully tended gardens a testament to vampire wealth and refinement. Olive trees cast silver shadows across marble pathways, and the scent of jasmine hung heavy in the night air, mixing with the distant aroma of the bread ovens in the servants' quarters. The estate sprawled across several acres of prime Florentine real estate, its walls high enough to ensure privacy for activities that might disturb human neighbors. Ancient Roman statues lined the walkways, and fountains carved by master craftsmen provided the sound of running water that helped mask conversations from prying ears. The guards arrived precisely at 1 in the morning, dragging their charge between them. In the moonlight, away from the torches and shadows of the auction house, Serafina could see him more clearly. The scars covering his body were even more intricate than she had realized, a complex web of symbols and patterns that seemed to tell a story written in pain and silver fire. His build was impressive despite obvious malnutrition. Broad shoulders, lean muscle, the physique of a warrior rather than a scholar or craftsman. But it was his hands that caught her attention. Despite the calluses from his shackles, they were elegant, long-fingered, the hands of someone accustomed to wielding power rather than tools. "Leave us," she commanded the guards, producing a purse heavy with gold. "Your services are no longer required." They departed eagerly, no doubt anxious to spend their payment in the city's taverns and brothels. Serafina waited until their footsteps faded completely before approaching her purchase. "You're free," she said simply, producing an ornate key from her sleeve. The key was silver, which would burn her fingers if she held it too long, but she endured the pain. "I'll remove your shackles, provide you with clothing, coin, and safe passage to wherever you wish to go." The man remained motionless, head bowed, giving no indication that he had heard her words. "I know you can understand me," she continued, stepping closer. "I saw you react during the auction. You're not the broken slave they believe you to be." Still no response, but she noticed his breathing had changed slightly, become more controlled, more deliberate. Serafina moved around him, studying the intricate scarring that covered his body. Up close, she could see that the symbols weren't just carved into his skin. They had been burned there with silver, the metal that was anathema to vampire flesh. The pain must have been excruciating, beyond anything a human could endure and survive. "These marks," she said softly, reaching out to trace one of the symbols in the air just above his skin. "They're not human work. They're vampire-binding runes, aren't they? But not just any runes. These are from the old texts, the forbidden knowledge that most of our kind have forgotten." At her words, the man's entire body went rigid, every muscle tensing as if preparing for flight or fight. "I thought so," she whispered, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. "The question is, what vampire could survive such treatment? And why would they allow themselves to be enslaved?" For a long moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sound of night birds and the whisper of wind through the olive trees. Then slowly, deliberately, he raised his head. Serafina stumbled backward, her hand flying to her throat in shock. His eyes blazed with silver fire, not the golden amber of her own vampire lineage, not the crimson of the blood-drunk, but pure, ancient silver that seemed to hold the light of stars themselves. They were eyes that had seen the rise and fall of empires, eyes that held the weight of centuries. "Impossible," she breathed. But even as she spoke, she knew she was looking at something far beyond the ordinary. He studied her face with those otherworldly eyes, and she felt as though he was seeing straight through to her soul. reading every secret she had ever kept. When he spoke, his voice was like aged wine and distant thunder, carrying the weight of centuries and the authority of forgotten kings. "You have your mother's eyes," he said softly, and the words hit her like a physical blow. "What did you say?" "Lady Isabel Valdres. She had the same golden eyes, the same stubborn tilt to her chin when she was determined to have her way." A sad smile crossed his lips, transforming his entire face. "She was magnificent, even as a child. I can see her spirit lives on in you." "You knew my mother?" Serafina's voice was barely a whisper. Her mother had died over a century ago, when Serafina was barely more than a child herself. The memories were precious and few. "I knew her well. She was a dear friend, in the days before the Covenant's influence spread so far." His expression grew distant, lost in memories that spanned centuries. "She used to bring me books when I was confined. Philosophy, poetry, tales of adventure. She said everyone deserved to have their mind fed, even prisoners." "Confined?" Serafina's mind reeled. "But that would mean that I am far older than I appear, yes." He moved with fluid grace despite his chains, dropping to one knee before her in a gesture that seemed both natural and deeply significant. "My lady, I have waited 200 years for you." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Serafina gripped the marble fountain behind her for support, her mind struggling to process what she was hearing. "That's impossible. You were in a human slave auction." "You're human?" He laughed, but there was no humor in the sound, only centuries of pain and bitter irony. "I am many things, Duchess Serafina Valdres, but human is not one of them." He gestured to the scars covering his body, and in the moonlight she could see them more clearly. The silver burns formed a complex pattern of binding runes, each one designed to suppress and contain supernatural power. "These marks were not made by human hands," he continued, "but by vampire magic of the highest order. Binding spells designed to keep me diminished, trapped in a form that could be broken and controlled." "Who are you?" she demanded, though part of her already suspected the answer would change everything. He rose slowly, and even weakened by his bonds, power radiated from him like heat from a forge. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of ages. "I am Alaric Dracul, first of our kind, the one your histories call the progenitor. And you, Serafina Valdres, are the last pure descendant of my bloodline." The fountain's edge cut into her palms as she gripped it tighter. Every vampire child knew the legends of Alaric Dracul, the first vampire, the one who had created their entire race before vanishing into myth over a millennium ago. But legends were just stories, weren't they? "You're lying," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Everything about him, his presence, his power, the way the very air seemed to respond to his emotions, spoke of truth. "Am I?" His silver eyes held hers, and she felt something electric pass between them, a connection that went deeper than blood or magic. "Tell me, Duchess, have you never wondered why your powers are so much stronger than others of your generation? Why you can walk in sunlight longer than any vampire alive? Why you can compel with just a glance, heal wounds that would cripple lesser vampires?" She had wondered. Her abilities had always set her apart, made her the subject of whispered speculation among vampire society. Other nobles her age could barely tolerate dawn's first light, while she could walk freely until the sun reached its zenith. Her strength, speed, and magical abilities far exceeded what should have been possible for someone of her relatively young age. "You are my blood," Alaric continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "The last pure descendant of my original line, and I have endured 2 centuries of captivity, torture, and degradation, because I saw your face in a vision. I knew you would come for me." "This is madness," she whispered, but even as she spoke, she could feel the truth of his words resonating in her bones. "Is it?" He stepped closer, and she caught his scent, not the metallic tang of fresh blood that clung to most vampires, but something deeper, more primal. Ancient forests, midnight storms, the very essence of vampiric power made manifest. "Look at me, truly look, and tell me you don't feel the connection." Against every instinct screaming at her to flee, Serafina met his gaze fully. The moment their eyes locked, the world exploded into visions that took her breath away. She saw a great castle shrouded in perpetual mist, its towers reaching toward storm-dark skies like grasping fingers. She saw herself standing on a throne carved from black marble and inlaid with silver, wearing a crown of obsidian and starlight. She saw Alaric kneeling before her as an entire vampire court bowed in reverence, their voices raised in ancient songs of loyalty and devotion. She saw battles fought with magic and steel, saw herself wielding power that could reshape the very fabric of reality. She saw vampires and humans working together, building a world where both races could thrive without fear or hatred. And through it all she felt love, a love so deep and pure and patient that it took her breath away, a love that had endured centuries of separation and suffering without dimming. She jerked back from the vision, gasping for air she didn't need. "What did you just do to me?" "Nothing," Alaric replied, his expression serious and intent. "Those are memories of what is to come, echoes of a future that has been written in the stars for 1,000 years. "I don't want to see the future," she snapped, fear making her voice sharp and defensive. "I don't want visions or prophecies or destinies. I just want to help people, to make a difference in whatever small way I can." "And that," he said softly, his voice filled with something that might have been wonder, "is exactly why you must accept what you are." "Which is what exactly?" "The rightful queen of all vampires." The words hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Serafina felt the weight of them, the terrible responsibility they implied, the crushing burden of expectations she had never asked for. "I don't want to be queen of anything," she said desperately, backing away from him. "I buy slaves to free them. I give gold to human orphanages. I want nothing to do with vampire politics or power games." And that compassion, that desire to protect the innocent regardless of their species, is precisely why our kind needs you to rule. Alaric's voice was gentle but implacable, carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "Do you know what vampire society has become in my absence?" She thought of Count Ravenna's casual cruelty, of Lord Malpheus's sadistic games, of the auction house where humans were sold like cattle for the entertainment of monsters. She thought of the whispered stories of entire villages drained dry, of human children stolen from their beds to serve as playthings for bored nobles. "I see that you do," Alaric continued, reading the expression on her face. "The Crimson Covenant has ruled from the shadows for 5 centuries, turning vampires into the monsters that humans believe us to be. They have corrupted everything I tried to build, perverted the gifts I gave our kind." The Crimson Covenant? The name sent a chill down her spine, though she wasn't sure why. The cabal that overthrew me. They convinced my children that compassion was weakness, that power existed only to be abused. Under their rule, vampires have become parasites, feeding not just on blood, but on suffering itself. Before Serafina could respond, a commotion erupted from the direction of her estate's main gates. Shouts echoed through the night, followed by the distinctive crack of vampire magic being unleashed. The sound of steel on steel rang out, and she caught the acrid scent of supernatural fire on the wind. Alaric's head snapped toward the sound, his nostrils flaring as he tested the air. When he spoke, his voice was grim with certainty. "They've found us." "Who?" "The Crimson Covenant. The ones who bound me." His silver eyes blazed brighter, and for a moment she glimpsed the terrible power that lay dormant within him. "They know I'm free, which means they know about you." The estate's ornate iron gates exploded inward with a sound like thunder, the metal twisted and blackened by supernatural force. 3 figures materialized from the shadows, moving with the fluid grace of apex predators. They wore blood-red cloaks that seemed to absorb light, and their faces were hidden behind ornate masks of silver and bone that depicted scenes of torture and death. The leader, distinguished by golden trim on his robes and a mask carved to resemble a snarling demon with ruby eyes, spoke in a voice like grinding stone mixed with the screams of the damned. "Alaric Dracul, you've led us quite a chase." "Malachar," Alaric replied, positioning himself protectively in front of Serafina. Even bound and weakened, he moved like a warrior born, his body coiled for violence. "Still hiding behind masks, I see. Some things never change. And you're still collecting strays," the masked vampire replied, his attention shifting to Serafina with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "Duchess Valdris, how unfortunate that you've become entangled in affairs beyond your understanding." "She understands more than you think," Alaric growled, and Serafina could feel power beginning to build around him despite his bonds. Malachar laughed, a sound like breaking glass mixed with screaming wind. Does she? Does she know that you orchestrated your own capture? That you allowed us to bind and torture you for 2 centuries all for this moment? The words hit Serafina like a physical blow. She turned to stare at Alaric, searching his face for denial, for some sign that this was another lie meant to manipulate her. What is he talking about? She demanded. Oh yes, Malachar continued, clearly enjoying her shock and the pain it caused. Our dear progenitor could have escaped at any time. His power, even bound, far exceeds ours. But he needed to appear helpless, needed you to rescue him so you would trust him. Is that true? She asked, her voice cracking with betrayal. Alaric's jaw tightened, and for a long moment, he was silent. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with regret and something that might have been shame. The circumstances were more complex than, "Answer me." Power crackled in her voice, and she felt something ancient and commanding rise within her. The very air around them seemed to thrum with energy, and the olive trees swayed despite the absence of wind. Did you allow yourself to be enslaved? The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Finally, Alaric met her eyes, and she saw the truth there before he spoke it. Yes. The betrayal hit Serafina like a dagger to the heart, cold and sharp and devastating. She stumbled backward, her golden eyes blazing with hurt and fury that made the very air around her shimmer with power. "You manipulated me," she whispered, and the pain in her voice made Alaric flinch as if she had struck him with silver. "I endured 200 years of agony for you," he said fiercely, his own pain evident in every word. "Every day of torture, every humiliation, every moment of despair. I bore it all because I knew it would lead me to you. That is not manipulation, Serafina. That is devotion beyond mortal comprehension." "How touching," Malachar sneered, his masked face turning toward his companions. "But this reunion ends now. The Covenant has ruled vampire society for 5 centuries. We will not yield to some prophetic pretender and her puppet master." He raised his hand, and dark energy began to gather around his fingers like living shadow. The other 2 Covenant members flanked him, their own power crackling through the air with the sound of distant thunder. "Kill them both," Malachar commanded, his voice carrying the authority of centuries of unchallenged rule. The attack came with supernatural speed that would have been invisible to human eyes. The 3 Covenant vampires moved like liquid darkness, their magic tearing through the air with the sound of rending silk. Serafina barely had time to gasp before Alaric was in motion. Despite his weakened state and the binding chains that burned his flesh, he fought like a force of nature unleashed. His movements were fluid, precise, deadly, the product of 1,000 years of combat experience and an intimate knowledge of vampire weaknesses. He caught the first attacker's throat in an iron grip, his silver eyes blazing as ancient power flowed through him despite the suppression runes. "Stay behind me," he commanded Serafina, not taking his eyes off their enemies. But she was no helpless maiden waiting to be rescued. Drawing on her own considerable abilities, she gestured sharply, and the marble fountain exploded outward in a spray of stone and water. The debris struck one of the masked vampires, sending him stumbling backward and giving Alaric the opening he needed to press his attack. "Impressive," Malachar observed, dodging the flying stone with casual grace. "The bloodline runs true, but raw power without training is merely chaos." He unleashed a wave of crimson energy that sent both Serafina and Alaric flying backward. They crashed into the olive trees with bone-jarring force, branches snapping under the impact. Serafina tasted blood in her mouth and felt the sting of silver burns where Malachar's magic had touched her. "The binding spells have made you weak, old friend," Malachar taunted as he advanced on Alaric's prone form. 2 centuries of silver burns and blood deprivation have taken their toll. You're not the unstoppable progenitor anymore. Alaric struggled to his feet, silver blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. But instead of despair, his expression held something that made Malachar pause. A cold, calculating smile that spoke of secrets yet unrevealed. "Perhaps," Alaric said, his voice growing stronger despite his injuries. "But I've had time to think during my captivity. Time to plan. Did you really believe I would face you unprepared?" He whistled, a sharp, piercing note that seemed to resonate in the very stones of the courtyard. Within moments, the night sky filled with the sound of beating wings. Hundreds of bats poured from the surrounding buildings, their eyes glowing with the same silver light as Alaric's. "Impossible," One of the other Covenant members hissed, his mask slipping to reveal a face twisted by centuries of cruelty. The binding should prevent you from commanding them. The binding prevents me from accessing my full power, Alaric replied, his voice growing stronger as the bats swirled around him in a living tornado of wings and fury. But these creatures remember their first master. They have been waiting just as I have. The bats attacked in a coordinated assault that spoke of intelligence far beyond mere animal instinct. Their tiny claws and teeth found gaps in the Covenant vampires' defenses, and their sheer numbers made defense impossible. In the chaos, Alaric grabbed Serafina's hand. "We need to leave. Now." "This is my home," she protested, even as she allowed him to pull her toward the garden's back entrance. "And it will be ash by morning if we stay." His grip tightened, and she could feel the tremor in his hands. Whether from weakness or suppressed power, she couldn't tell. "Trust me." Looking into his silver eyes, seeing the desperation there mixed with something deeper, something that might have been love, she nodded. Together, they fled through the estate's carefully tended gardens. As the battle raged behind them, they ran through the narrow streets of Florence, keeping to the shadows and avoiding the main thoroughfares where human guards might question their presence. Alaric's knowledge of the city's hidden passages surprised her, until she remembered he'd had centuries to learn them, both before and during his captivity. "Where are we going?" she asked as they paused in the doorway of an abandoned church, both of them breathing hard despite their supernatural stamina. "Somewhere safe, somewhere the Covenant won't think to look." He turned to face her, and in the moonlight streaming through broken stained glass windows, she could see the exhaustion etched in his features. "But first, you deserve the truth, all of it. I'm listening." He sank onto a broken pew, suddenly looking every one of his 1,000+ years. The weight of centuries seemed to press down on his shoulders, and for the first time, she saw him not as the legendary progenitor, but as a man who had endured unimaginable suffering. "I was not always as I am now. Once I was human, a scholar in ancient Babylon, obsessed with unlocking the secrets of life and death. I believed that mortality was a disease that could be cured, that death was simply another puzzle to be solved." Serafina sat across from him, drawn despite herself by the pain in his voice and the raw honesty of his confession. "I found what I sought in a temple dedicated to Ishtar, the goddess of love and war. The ritual that transformed me was costly. It required the sacrifice of everything I held dear: my humanity, my mortality, my capacity for simple happiness. In return, I gained eternal life and the ability to share that gift with others. You created the vampire race." "I did, and for centuries I ruled justly. I created laws to protect both vampires and humans, established territories, maintained the balance between our worlds." His hands clenched into fists, and she could see the silver scars on his wrists where the shackles had burned him. "But power corrupts, even when wielded with the best of intentions. Some of my children grew hungry for more blood, more territory, more dominance over mortals. The Covenant, led by Malachar, my first creation, my greatest failure." Alaric's voice turned bitter with self-recrimination. "I made him in a moment of loneliness, desperate for a companion who could understand the weight of immortality. Instead, I created a monster who convinced others that I had grown weak, that my compassion for humans made me unfit to rule. But you escaped their coup." "No." His silver eyes met hers, and she saw centuries of pain reflected there. "I allowed myself to be captured because I had seen a vision, a prophecy granted by the same goddess who made me. I saw you, Serafina. Your face, your power, your compassionate heart. I knew that you were the key to everything." She leaned forward, her anger warring with curiosity and something deeper. "Key to what?" "To saving our kind from itself. Under Covenant rule, vampires have become the monsters that humans believe us to be. They treat mortals as cattle, wage wars for sport, corrupt everything they touch. But you," he reached out, stopping just short of touching her face. "You buy slaves to free them. You give gold to orphanages. You have power but use it to protect the weak. You are what I dreamed our kind could become. So you orchestrated your own enslavement, endured 2 centuries of torture, all to manipulate me into helping you reclaim your throne. I endured 2 centuries of torture because I love you." The words hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Serafina's breath caught in her throat and she felt something shift in her chest, a wall she hadn't even known existed beginning to crack. That's impossible. You don't even know me. I have known you for 200 years, Alaric said softly, his voice heavy with emotion that seemed to fill the abandoned church. Every night of my captivity, I saw your face in my dreams. I watched you grow from a child into the remarkable woman you've become. I felt your pain when your parents died, your joy when you first used your powers to help someone, your loneliness as you struggled to find your place in a world that feared your compassion. Tears she didn't know she was capable of shedding began to fall, silver droplets that caught the moonlight like liquid starfire. You're saying you've been watching me my entire life? Through the vision, yes. It was the only thing that kept me sane during the worst moments. Knowing that somewhere you existed, that you were growing stronger, kinder, more beautiful with each passing year. This is madness, she whispered, but her heart was racing with something that felt dangerously close to hope. Is it? Tell me you don't feel it too. This connection between us. Tell me that when you look at me, you don't see something familiar, something that calls to your very soul. She wanted to deny it, but she couldn't. From the moment their eyes had met in the courtyard, she'd felt something she couldn't name, a recognition that went deeper than sight or sound, as if she had been waiting her entire life for this moment without knowing it. Even if what you say is true, she said finally, I can't be what you want me to be. I'm not queen material. I don't want to rule anyone, and that is exactly why you must. He stood, moving to the broken altar, where moonlight painted silver patterns on cracked stone. The Covenant has turned vampire society into a nightmare. They enslave humans for sport, corrupt noble families, spread their influence like a plague through mortal governments. Only someone with the power to challenge them and the heart to rule justly can stop them. There must be others. There are no others. His voice was final, implacable. You are the last of the pure bloodline, the only one with enough power to break their hold on our kind. I am not asking you to do this for me, Serafina. I am asking you to do it for every human child who will be sold into slavery tomorrow, for every vampire who remembers what honor means, for the future of both our races. Before she could respond, the church doors exploded inward in a shower of splinters and stone. Malachar strode through the wreckage, flanked by a dozen Covenant soldiers in their distinctive crimson robes. Their masks gleamed in the moonlight, each one depicting a different scene of torture or death. Really, Alaric, he said conversationally, brushing dust from his ornate mask. Hiding in a church? How delightfully cliché. How did you find us? Serafina demanded, rising to her feet and feeling power gather around her like a storm. Blood magic, my dear. He held up a crystal vial filled with silver liquid, Alaric's blood from their earlier fight. Once we have a sample, we can track you anywhere in the world. Did you really think you could escape so easily? Alaric stepped protectively in front of Serafina again, his body coiled for action despite his weakened state. Let her go, Malachar. Your quarrel is with me. Oh, but that's where you're wrong. Malachar's smile was visible even through his mask. She's the real prize. The last pure blood. The prophesied queen. With her under our control, we can legitimize our rule for another 1,000 years. I'll die before I serve you, Serafina snarled, power crackling around her hands like silver lightning. Death? Oh no, my dear. We have much more creative plans. He gestured to his soldiers. Take them both. Alive. The fight was brutal and brief. Weakened from their earlier battle and outnumbered 12-2, Alaric and Serafina fought with desperate fury, but couldn't match the combined might of so many enemies. Serafina's power crackled through the air, shattering stone and sending Covenant soldiers flying. But for every one she defeated, 2 more took his place. Alaric moved like a demon despite his bonds, his centuries of combat experience allowing him to hold his own against multiple opponents. But the binding runes were taking their toll, and she could see him growing weaker with each passing moment. Within minutes, they were both bound with silver chains that burned their skin and suppressed their abilities. The pain was excruciating, but Serafina gritted her teeth and refused to give Malachar the satisfaction of hearing her scream. Excellent, Malachar purred, studying his captives with obvious satisfaction. Now, let's discuss your futures. The journey to the Covenant stronghold was a nightmare of pain and humiliation. They were dragged through the streets of Florence in chains, past humans who averted their eyes, and vampires who watched with cruel amusement. The silver burned constantly, sapping their strength and making every movement agony. The Covenant stronghold lay hidden beneath Florence's ancient catacombs, a vast network of chambers carved from living rock and decorated with the bones of their victims. As Serafina and Alaric were dragged through torch-lit corridors lined with human skulls, she began to understand the true scope of their enemies' power and cruelty. 500 years we've ruled from the shadows, Malachar explained as they walked, his voice echoing off the bone-lined walls. Kings and popes dance to our tune without knowing it. We've built an empire on blood and fear, and it has served us well. They passed chambers filled with horrific sights, humans in cages, their eyes empty of hope, vampire nobles torturing mortals for sport, laboratories where unspeakable experiments were conducted on both species. Serafina's stomach turned, but she forced herself to look, to remember every detail. If she survived this, she would see these horrors ended. You see, Malachar continued, your predecessor's greatest weakness was his sentimentality. He actually believed vampires and humans could coexist peacefully. Ridiculous, of course. We are apex predators. They are prey. The natural order is clear. The natural order, Alaric said quietly, is not about predation. It's about balance. Spoken like the weak fool you've become, Malachar's laugh echoed through the corridors. But no matter. After tonight, there will be no more talk of balance or coexistence. They were brought to a vast underground chamber that took Serafina's breath away. The ceiling soared overhead, supported by columns carved to resemble twisted trees, whose branches formed grotesque faces. But it was the chamber's center that drew her attention. 2 ornate thrones carved from black marble and inlaid with silver, positioned above a complex ritual circle that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. Dozens of vampires in crimson robes filled the chamber, their faces hidden behind masks of bone and metal. They watched in silence as Serafina and Alaric were forced to their knees before the thrones. "Behold," Malachar announced to the assembled crowd, his voice carrying easily through the vast space. "The pretender Alaric and his chosen heir. Tonight we end the old bloodline forever." A cheer went up from the crowd, and Serafina felt a chill that had nothing to do with the underground chamber's temperature. "The ritual is simple," Malachar continued, ascending to one of the thrones. "We drain the pure blood from both of you, consuming your power and adding it to our own. The progenitor's strength will make us unstoppable, and the heir's death will ensure no one can challenge our rule." "You're making a mistake," Alaric said quietly, but his voice carried clearly through the chamber. "Am I? You're bound, weakened, helpless. What possible threat could you pose?" Alaric smiled, and for the first time since she'd met him, Serafina saw the ancient predator he truly was. The expression was cold, calculating, and absolutely terrifying. "I told you I had time to plan during my captivity. Did you think I spent 2 centuries doing nothing but suffering? What are you talking about? The binding spells you used on me, they were designed to suppress my power, not eliminate it. For 200 years, that power has been building, compressing, growing stronger in its confinement." His silver eyes began to glow brighter, like water behind a dam. Malachar's confidence wavered for the first time. "Impossible. We would have sensed. You sensed what I wanted you to sense." Alaric's voice was growing stronger, more resonant. "But now, in this place of death surrounded by the bones of your victims, I can finally let it free." The silver chains around his wrists began to crack. "Stop him!" Malachar screamed. But it was too late. The chains shattered like glass and power erupted from Alaric like a physical force. The ancient vampire rose to his feet, no longer the weakened prisoner but something far more terrifying. The first of his kind, the progenitor, with 2 centuries of compressed power flowing through him like liquid fire. The Covenant vampires attacked en masse, but they might as well have been children fighting a hurricane. Alaric moved through them like death incarnate, his power tearing through their defenses as if they were made of paper. Silver fire erupted from his hands, and where it touched the Covenant soldiers, they screamed and crumbled to ash. In the chaos, Serafina felt her own chains weaken. The proximity to Alaric's unleashed power was affecting the binding magic, causing the suppression runes to flicker and fade. With a surge of effort that left her gasping, she broke free. "The ritual circle!" Alaric called to her over the sounds of battle. "Destroy it!" She saw what he meant. the intricate pattern carved into the stone floor, designed to channel and contain the power they would have drained from their victims. The circle pulsed with dark energy, and she could feel its malevolent purpose like a weight on her soul. Drawing on every ounce of her strength, Serafina slammed her fist into the center of the circle. Power erupted outward, shattering the carved lines and sending cracks racing across the chamber floor. The very foundations of the stronghold shook, and chunks of stone began to rain from the ceiling. "No!" Malachar lunged for her, his mask falling away to reveal a face twisted by centuries of hatred and cruelty. But Alaric intercepted him, and the two ancient vampires clashed with devastating force. They were evenly matched in skill and cunning, but Alaric's recently unleashed power gave him a crucial advantage. Still, Malachar was desperate and cunning, using the chaos of the crumbling chamber to his advantage. "You cannot win," he snarled as they grappled among the falling stones. "Even if you defeat me, there are thousands of us. We have infiltrated every court, every government, every center of power in the mortal world. You are just two against an empire. We are not alone," Serafina said from behind him. Malachar spun, and his twisted face registered shock. Serafina stood in the center of the destroyed ritual circle, but she was no longer the same woman who had bought a slave to set him free. Power radiated from her like starlight, and her golden eyes blazed with ancient authority that made the very air around her shimmer. "I am Serafina Valdris," she declared, her voice echoing through the chamber with supernatural force that compelled attention from every being present. "Daughter of the pure bloodline, heir to the first throne, rightful queen of all vampires, and I claim my birthright." The words hit the assembled Covenant members like a physical blow. Several of them actually fell to their knees, compelled by the power in her voice and the ancient authority that flowed through her veins. The very stones of the chamber seemed to recognize her claim, humming with resonant energy that made the torches flicker and dance. "Impossible," Malachar breathed, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. For the first time in centuries, she heard uncertainty in his tone. "You wanted to drain my power," Serafina continued, advancing on him with measured steps. Each footfall seemed to make the chamber's foundations tremble, and cracks spread outward from where she walked. "But you made a crucial error. This place, these bones, this ritual circle, it's all connected to the source of vampire power itself. When I destroyed the circle, I didn't just disrupt your spell. I awakened something that has been sleeping for 1,000 years." She gestured, and the bones lining the walls began to glow with silver light. The skulls of countless victims turned their empty sockets toward the Covenant members, and a sound like whispered accusations filled the air. The very dead seemed to be rising in judgment. "Every vampire you've killed, every human you've murdered, every drop of innocent blood spilled in this place, it all cries out for justice." Her voice grew stronger, more commanding, until it seemed to come from the stones themselves. "And I am its instrument." Malachar tried to flee, but roots of silver light erupted from the floor, binding him in place. Around the chamber, other Covenant members found themselves similarly trapped, held fast by the very bones of their victims. The dead would have their justice at last. "This ends now," Serafina declared, her golden eyes blazing like twin suns. "Your reign of terror is over. You cannot simply execute us all," Malachar protested, struggling against his bonds. "We are still vampires. We deserve justice," Alaric finished, moving to stand beside Serafina. Despite the battle, he looked stronger than she had ever seen him, as if unleashing his power had restored something vital that had been missing. "You deserve justice, and you shall have it." He raised his hand and silver fire began to consume the Covenant vampires. But this was not the fire of destruction. It was the fire of purification. As it touched them, their masks and robes crumbled away, revealing faces twisted by centuries of cruelty and corruption. The fire didn't burn flesh. It burned guilt, hatred, and corruption. For those Covenant members who had committed their crimes out of fear or coercion, who still retained some spark of their original humanity, the fire cleansed them, leaving them gasping but alive and free of the Covenant's influence. For those who had reveled in cruelty, who had chosen evil freely and repeatedly, who had lost all trace of conscience or compassion, the flames consumed them entirely, reducing them to ash that scattered in the wind. "You have a choice," Serafina told the survivors, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. Renounce your evil ways, swear fealty to the true throne, and live to serve justice, or burn in the fire of your own sins." The silver flames continued their work, separating the redeemable from the irredeemable with perfect accuracy. One by one, the surviving covenant members knelt and swore allegiance. Their voices echoed through the chamber as they pledged to serve the true queen and to make amends for their crimes. When the fire had finished its work, only Malachar remained standing among the covenant leadership. "You were my first creation," Alaric said sadly, approaching his former protege. "I had such hopes for you. I thought you would help me build a better world, and I had such contempt for your weakness." Malachar spat, though his defiance was tinged with desperation. "Your compassion, your mercy, they made you unfit to rule. Power exists to be used, not wasted on sentiment. Then you understand nothing of true power," Seraphina said softly, and there was genuine sadness in her voice. "True power protects the innocent. True power serves justice. What you wielded was not power. It was merely cruelty." "Do what you will," Malachar snarled. "I will never bow to either of you." "Then you choose your fate," Seraphina said, and the silver fire began to consume him. But unlike the others, his burning was slow, giving him time to reconsider, to repent. The flames offered him chance after chance to renounce his evil ways, to accept redemption. But Malachar's hatred ran too deep, his corruption too complete. He cursed them both until the flames finally silenced him forever. With his death, the Covenant's hold on vampire society crumbled like a house built on sand. The months that followed were a whirlwind of change and reconstruction. Seraphina found herself thrust into a role she had never wanted, but could not deny. From the restored Dracul castle in the Carpathian Mountains, she began the monumental task of rebuilding vampire society from the ground up. The first order of business was establishing new laws, codes that protected both vampires and humans, that encouraged cooperation rather than domination. The slave markets were shut down permanently, their operators tried and punished according to the severity of their crimes. Human governments, freed from covenant influence, began to work openly with vampire representatives for the first time in centuries. It wasn't easy. There were resistance movements, vampires who preferred the old ways of casual cruelty and unlimited power. Some had grown so accustomed to treating humans as cattle that they couldn't conceive of any other relationship. Others simply enjoyed the suffering they caused and resented being told to stop. But Seraphina's combination of overwhelming strength and genuine compassion won over more converts than force ever could have. When she spoke of a future where both races could thrive together, where vampires could find purpose beyond mere predation, even the most hardened nobles began to listen. Alaric proved invaluable during the transition. His knowledge of vampire history and politics, combined with his restored powers, helped smooth the way for reforms that might otherwise have taken decades to implement. More importantly, his unwavering support gave Seraphina the confidence to make the hard decisions that leadership required. Their relationship evolved slowly, built on mutual respect and shared purpose, rather than the desperate circumstances of their first meeting. The love that had sustained Alaric through 2 centuries of torment proved to be real and deep, but Seraphina needed time to trust it, and him, fully. She established councils in every major city, with both vampire and human representatives working together to address the problems that centuries of covenant rule had created. Orphanages that had been feeding grounds became genuine sanctuaries. Trade agreements replaced extortion. Art and culture flourished as vampires rediscovered pursuits beyond violence. The changes weren't just political, they were personal. Vampires who had forgotten what it meant to feel pride in something other than cruelty began to remember. Humans who had lived in terror for generations started to hope for a better future. 6 months after the fall of the Covenant, Seraphina stood on the balcony of the restored Dracul castle, watching the sun set over the Carpathian Mountains. The view was breathtaking. Ancient peaks wreathed in mist, forests that had stood since before human civilization, a landscape that spoke of permanence and endurance. The castle itself had been transformed from a monument to power into a symbol of hope. Where once torture chambers had echoed with screams, now libraries and schools taught both species to understand each other. The great hall that had hosted orgies of violence now welcomed delegations seeking peaceful solutions to ancient conflicts. The Council of Florence has agreed to the new accords, Alaric reported, joining her on the balcony. He moved with the fluid grace she had come to love. No longer the broken slave, but not quite the ancient king either. Something new, something better. Good, she said, not taking her eyes off the sunset. And the resistance movements? Scattered and weakening. Most vampires are relieved to be free of the Covenant's tyranny. They welcome a return to the old ways. The real old ways, not the Covenant's perversion of them. She turned to face him, studying his profile in the golden light. Over the past months, as they had worked together to rebuild their world, she had come to understand the depth of his feelings for her. More importantly, she had discovered her own feelings for him. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "The 2 centuries of suffering?" "Never," he said without hesitation, turning to meet her gaze. "Every moment of pain was worth this. Worth you. Worth seeing you become the queen I always knew you could be. And if I had chosen differently, if I had refused the throne, then I would have respected your choice and found another way." He stepped closer, his silver eyes soft with love. "I told you once that I endured those centuries because I loved you. That was true. But I want you to know, I love you not because of some prophecy or vision, but because of who you are. Your compassion, your strength, your unwavering dedication to justice." She reached up to touch his face, marveling at how this ancient, powerful being could look at her with such tenderness. "I love you too," she whispered. "Not because fate decreed it, but because you showed me that even monsters can choose to be better." As they kissed, the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Below them, in the villages and cities they now protected, humans and vampires began to build a new world together. It would not be perfect. There would be challenges, setbacks, those who resisted change. But for the first time in centuries, there was hope. And sometimes, hope was enough. The wedding took place a year later, in the same courtyard where they had first met as master and slave. Representatives from every vampire house attended, along with human dignitaries who had once cowered in fear of their kind. The ceremony was conducted at sunset, symbolizing the end of one age and the beginning of another. As Serafina spoke her vows, promising to love and cherish the man who had waited 2 centuries for her, she thought about the strange twists of fate that had brought them together. She had gone to a slave auction intending to free one more victim of vampire cruelty. Instead, she had found her destiny. "I, Alaric Dracul, take you, Serafina Valdris, to be my queen, my partner, my beloved," Alaric said, his voice carrying clearly through the assembled crowd. "I promise to stand beside you as we build a better world for all our children, vampire and human alike." When they kissed to seal their union, silver light erupted around them, visible to every guest. It was a sign, the old vampires whispered, a blessing from the goddess herself. The celebration lasted 3 days, but eventually, the guests departed and the newlyweds were left alone in their castle. They stood together on the balcony where they had shared their first real conversation, looking out over the kingdom they would rule together. "Any regrets?" Alaric asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Only one," Serafina replied, leaning back against his chest. "What's that?" "I wish I could have met you sooner, before the pain, before the centuries of separation. But then you wouldn't be who you are," he pointed out. "Your compassion was forged by seeing suffering. Your strength was built by standing alone against injustice. If we had met earlier, you might have been just another vampire noble content with power and privilege." She considered this, then smiled. "You're right. Everything happened exactly as it was meant to. The goddess works in mysterious ways," Alaric agreed. As they stood together watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, Serafina felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. The road ahead would not be easy. Rebuilding a civilization never was. But they would face it together, and that made all the difference. In the distance, a wolf howled, and its call was answered by others across the mountains. It was a sound that spoke of wildness and freedom, of ancient bonds that could never be broken. "Listen," Alaric whispered. "What am I listening for?" "The future," he said. "Can you hear it calling?" And she could. In the wolf songs and the whisper of wind through the trees, in the distant sounds of humans and vampires working together in the valley below, she heard the promise of something new and wonderful being born. The vampire who had bought a slave to set him free had become a queen. The slave who had waited 2 centuries for love had become a king. And together, they would write a new chapter in the history of both their kinds. Years passed, and their reign became the stuff of legend. The Valdres-Dracul Accords became the foundation for a new age of cooperation between species. Children grew up in a world where vampires were protectors rather than predators, where humans and vampires worked side by side to build something greater than either could achieve alone. Serafina never forgot her origins, the Duchess who had spent her fortune freeing slaves. Even as queen, she continued to champion the oppressed, to fight for those who had no voice. And Alaric, the ancient king who had learned humility through suffering, proved that even the most powerful could choose to serve rather than dominate. Their love story became a beacon of hope, proof that even the darkest circumstances could give birth to something beautiful. And in the end, that was perhaps their greatest achievement. Not the laws they wrote or the kingdoms they ruled, but the simple truth they embodied, that love, patience, and compassion could triumph over any darkness. What an incredible journey of love, destiny, and redemption. Alaric's 2-century wait and Serafina's transformation from compassionate Duchess to vampire queen shows us that sometimes the greatest love stories require the ultimate patience and sacrifice. Which moment moved you the most? When Alaric revealed his true identity? When Serafina finally embraced her destiny as queen? Or their wedding in the same courtyard where they first met? If you enjoyed this epic tale of prophecy and passion, make sure to subscribe for more supernatural romance stories that will keep you captivated from beginning to end. Drop a comment below and tell me, do you think Serafina made the right choice in accepting the throne? Or should she have chosen a simpler life? And get ready for our next story about a cursed werewolf prince who can only transform under a blood moon, but falls for the vampire huntress sworn to destroy him.